Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast.
We've got lots and lots of things to talk about and to do today.
Covering the territories from the 1940s to the 1990s.
It's the best thing going today.
Interviewing wrestlers, referees, authors, and other media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great.
The cream, yeah. The cream of the crop.
And now, here's your host, Tony Richards.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast. I'm Tony Richards, your host. And again, today, we're going to be going through a pro wrestling territory in our time tunnel 50 years ago in 1975, a very pivotal year in wrestling. We're going to talk about personalities. We're going to talk about the East Texas territory. We're going to be talking about the towns involved. We're going to talk about Fort Worth. We're going to talk about Houston. We're going to talk about Dallas, San Antonio, Corpus Christi, all those great towns that were being booked out of Fritz von Erich's booking office, the big-time wrestling booking office in Dallas. Yes, this is before world-class championship wrestling that everybody's so familiar with. This is in 1975. This is also the year in August that Fritz von Erich is going to become president of the National Wrestling Alliance. And we're going to have a special show about that coming up a little bit later on this year. So some great things coming up. Kurt Nielsen's going to be coming by here in a week or so to talk about his brand new book on Plowboy Stan Frazier. And I think Kurt was telling me his book is going to be available at the Cauliflower Alley Club reunion. So if you're going to Cauliflower Alley, make sure you find Kurt. Make sure you get a copy of this new book on Stan Frazier. His interview is coming up next week here on the Time Tunnel. Also, Tim Deals is going to be back here soon. We're covering the summer of 1975 in the Tennessee territory. We had Tim on a couple of weeks back, and we started talking about the first part of the year. Now we're going to get into the summer of 75. Also, we're going to Canada and the Great White North. Wes Maidment, Canadian historian, is going to be here to talk about Ontario, Canada. And Larry Lane, Red Dog Larry Lane, is going to be here to talk about his career in Calgary, Alberta, working for Stu Hart in 1975. Also, Jerry Oates is coming back. We're going to be talking about Kansas City in the summer of 75. Mike George is going to be coming by the Richards Ranch here for a visit to talk about the first half of his career in 75. Well, he was working with Jerry, and they were the NWA World Tag Team Champions in 75. And we're going to talk all about that. Bobby Simmons is going to be here talking about Georgia and the summer of 75 and so much more. All coming up here on the Time Tunnel Podcast, and I can't wait to share that with you. We're going to East Texas today, though. My East Texas analyst and historian Greg Klein is joining me at the Richards Ranch in the Time Tunnel, so let's join that show right now. Hey again, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel video and audio podcast. It's another exciting day because I'm welcoming back my dear friend and peer and colleague in wrestling history, Greg Klein from Greg Klein's Old School Wrestling Podcast. And we're here today to talk about shows that were booked out of the Dallas office in June and July of 1975. And we will talk more and more about that. Greg, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
Shoot, man, I'm so glad you're here. I love talking old school wrestling. I like talking old school wrestling with you. But before we get started, tell everybody a little bit about what you do and where to find you and the things you've got going on.
Sure. Well, I am, I guess, mostly known in these here parts as the film commissioner for Otsego County, New York, which includes Cooperstown, home of the Baseball Hall of Fame, and Oneonta, the city of the hills in the northern Catskill Mountains, known for a couple of really nice colleges, SUNY Oneonta, the State University of New York campus, and then Hartwick College, which is a wonderful private school that dates back hundreds of years now, actually, and was really sort of an outpost here in Otsego County, even before the people got here. You can find me online at film_Greg on Instagram and Film Otsego on Instagram. Also, my podcast, Greg Klein's Old School Wrestling Talk, which is on Facebook and available every place that you get podcasts. And no less an expert than Tony Richards said I have a nice platform where I talk about a very specific thing, which is Houston wrestling, Texas wrestling, old school Southern wrestling more than anything else.
Wonderful. Well, every time we do one of these shows, I will get at least, I don't know, 2 or 3 emails from people who, one of the things I love about doing this, and I've always been this way my whole career, no matter if it was in the broadcasting business or as a executive coach and consultant, and now as a wrestling historian and storyteller. I'm a bit of a contrarian. So when I hear someone say something, at least to myself, I challenge it in my own mind and then start challenging it by just putting some historical type stuff up. And the one that I always get from people is, well, I thought Houston was its own territory. And so, yes, it was in later years in the video era. Paul and his nephew, Peter Burkholz, did break away and did pretty much run Houston by itself, although they always had partners that they shared talent with. Most notably, most people are familiar with Bill Watts because that was the majority of the video era. But at this particular time in the 70s, Fritz von Erich's office in Dallas, and it's not world-class championship wrestling yet. It's still Big Time Wrestling, which was that was the marketing name for the wrestling company in Dallas, and the Dallas booking office was supplying the talent for Houston and for Corpus Christi and for San Antonio, and they were running their own area there in Dallas and Fort Worth. And so those are the towns that we'll be covering today in this June and July of 1975. So you have anything else to add to that? Did I get most of that right?
I always say that Houston was a city-state promotion in that they were in the state of Texas, obviously, and they were part of the Texas Loop. But, in this era, there's a lot of cases where you have a local promoter that then works with a booking office. Now, for the bulk of Texas wrestling history, Houston was the booking office during the Morris Siegel era. But when he dies, Fritz von Erich and Ed McLemore take over the booking office in 1967. And basically for the next 12 or 13 years, they're the ones running the bulk of the state. Now, we always exclude Amarillo and the Western Texas area and El Paso, which again, kind of its own city-state promotion. But the Dallas to Corpus, over to Wichita Falls, and then Houston, the kind of loop with San Antonio and Austin in the middle, that was usually run by a booking office. And it just so happens that most of the time we knew it was Houston. Later on, it's Dallas. And then, as you said, in the late 70s, early 80s, everybody breaks away from Fritz and goes about their own business. Houston goes with San Antonio. Then Houston goes with Mid-South. Paul Bosch really was never his own entity. But what confuses people is that Houston often had their own TV. And sometimes they would show back-to-back or interspliced Southwest TV with the Houston TV or Mid-South TV with the Houston TV. But they were always taping matches in Houston and then showing them back. After the 1950, 1951 era, it wasn't the main events because they realized that was killing the business. But it was always the semi-main events or the preliminary matches, or occasionally you'd get a main event if it was setting up the next show. I think that it's sort of nuanced as to what Houston was. The only clear thing is that for most of its run, it was the best wrestling city in the state of Texas. It was sort of the grandfather of Texas wrestling. And really, other than New York, Boston, Chicago, and occasionally LA and St. Louis, it was really, definitely a top 10 city in terms of the United States and North America.
Mm-hmm. And two, I think for fans to just put this in your mind, most of the time, now Paul Bosch is extremely well known as the promoter of Houston. And back in this era and in the years preceding the mid-70s, most local promoters were well known by their fans. people did know who their local promoter was in their town. Paul was very visible, just like Muchnick was in St. Louis, and just like Jim Crockett was, and just like Cowboy Latrell was in Tampa, and other promoters. Paul just lasted a really long time. And the other thing that made him a little bit unique, I think, is that he hosted the television show, which,
Well, that's the big thing.
yeah, which really increased his brand awareness as far as the promoter, I think.
Paul was a big star in Houston. That was one of his breakout markets as a professional wrestler. And he left to go to the war. He was a multi-time, many decorated war hero who led a big movement from France into Germany. I mean, really, when I say war hero, that probably doesn't do him justice in terms of the effect that him and his unit had on the war, in the European campaign. And when he gets back, he gets injured in a car accident. He probably would have been a much bigger star had he not had that car accident. But it is a twist of fate because Morris Siegel likes him and decides to give him a job as the voice of Houston wrestling. So from its beginning, Paul was the voice on radio, and then he was the face and the voice on television from 1949, throughout the history of Houston wrestling, almost 4 decades, all the way until 1987. So, he, even when Morris Siegel was the promoter, Paul was the face of Houston wrestling. And then obviously he takes over in 1967 as the promoter after Morris Siegel's death and has a 20-year run. And he was, like Morris Siegel, like Cal Farley, like the Funks and Doc Starpolis and Eddie Graham, he was very into his community. So, for decades, Paul was known as a civic man who was vital and caring and, had an effect on the city of Houston in more ways than just his wrestling matches.
If I.W. Marks can make my ears look pretty, think what he can do for hers.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at uswapodcast.com.
All right, well, let's get into June of '75 here. I'll turn the stick over to you and let you fly us here for a little bit. So where do we want to start here?
Well, the first thing that I noted is that Mad Dog Vashan is having his moment in Texas wrestling. He gets there in April of 1975. Almost immediately, he wins the Brass Knuckles title from Superstar Graham. And, that sets up like months and months of Battle of the Bullies with Joe Ledoux and all sorts of tough guy action where Mad Dog is defending the title. And it ultimately in June and July ends up with him getting title shots against Jack Brisco in Houston, one in June and one in July. And I thought that was a big deal. The first week of June, we say goodbye to the Baron, Tony Rocco, as he loses his feud and his mask in many cities to El Gran Marcus. Jack Brisco comes in for a week in June and a week in July. We have a big Corpus Christi show, I believe June 12th, a Thursday in June in Corpus Christi. And there's a lot going on in Houston with trying to find a second venue. And this is the era where they switched to the Astro Arena as their backup venue. And we can talk about that a little bit when we get to it. It is not ultimately deemed a success.
So yeah, let's you want to start since the loop starts off Mondays in Fort Worth. So the
Yeah,
loop
let's start with Fort Worth.
the loop goes Monday Fort Worth, Tuesday Dallas, Wednesday San Antonio, Thursday Corpus, Friday is Houston, and then a spot show here and there on Saturdays. Most promotions in this era did not run on Sundays, at least in the South.
In
So
Texas, yeah, you still couldn't run in 1975 on a Sunday. They get that, 1977, they go to the summit famously on a Sunday afternoon, and Harley Race thinks it's a night show, as we all know.
right.
But you couldn't do that yet. Now they only run, it looks like from your notes, a couple of times on Saturday, and they are either going to Houston because they can't get a Friday night show, or smaller towns in between, basically the Dallas, Houston, San Antonio triangle.
Yeah, I always think about this way too, is that this is what we have records for, right? And
Right.
so, I ran into this with Gulf Coast Championship Wrestling. Was I just was sitting there thinking to myself, they had to run more than this for the talent to be able to survive. And so when I was talking to Michael Norris about it, he had a lot of results I didn't have because he had done a bunch of research and found a lot of stuff that's not even available on the internet. So this is just stuff we have records for. So they probably did
Right.
run most Saturdays. We just don't have that. Have those records, but we do have a couple that we will talk about today. So let's start
Well,
Mondays in Fort Worth.
yeah, definitely. So, one of the things that I noticed is that the Booker Red Bastine is putting people over quite a bit. And in particular in Fort Worth, he loses to Mad Dog. I think he loses to Superstar Graham. And again, we're building up Mad Dog here. We've got a full month of Mad Dog main events. He does win or starts a feud with Joe Ledoux that he's going to end up winning when Joe Ledoux moves on. He teams with Al Madril, which is a strange team, but then the next week he fights Al Madril. And on the 30th, we have a great tag team match. It kind of changes whether it's in North Texas or South Texas, where we've got Red Bastine and Joe Ledoux against Billy Graham and Steve Strong. And in South Texas, it tends to be like Jose and Al against Billy Graham and Steve Strong. And then we've also got Al Madril trying to get the Texas title back from John Tolos.
I think this is starting to wind down Red's tenure as Booker here. I think at the end of this year might be when he moves on, and I think Leo Garibaldi comes in to be the Booker for a little while before Gary Hart comes back. And I did get a couple of emails from people who, when are you going to get to more about Gary Hart? Well, probably in 6 or 7 shows from now, we will probably get Gary coming back into Texas. But it's a pretty interesting time when he comes back.
Yeah, there's some obviously great stuff. A lot of the wrestlers associated with Gary Hart, that start to make their way into the Texas territory. And, we know quite extensively about his relationship with the Von Erichs. But I like Red's run here in Texas. And, we should note not only do we have the Mad Dog defending his brass knuckles title against all comers. We're still in the John Tolos as Texas champion era, although that's going to change in a couple of weeks.
Talking about being a contrarian, I did get somebody on X who posted or sent me a direct message or something about Tolos. I thought he was a California guy. Well, if you don't dig into the background of these guys, you don't know. But I mean, later on, yeah, he homesteaded in California quite a bit, but he also had a couple of really strong Texas runs, one of which we're talking about here.
Yeah. Last I heard, our good friend Evan Ginsberg was going to be doing a John Tolos book.
I hope so.
And I don't know what's happened with that, but he was a big fan of John Tolos, and he did reach out to me more than a year ago for some of my John Tolos in Texas programs. And, as we turned up, he has a great history and a great run this summer in Texas.
All right, let's go to Dallas on Tuesdays then.
Yeah, so on the 3rd, we have the Baron getting unmasked by Marcus, finale of that tag team and feud. We've also got a tag team with Superstar Billy Graham and Mad Dog Vashan. And in this case, it's Jose and Joe Ledoux. And that goes to a time limit draw, if you can imagine that. The next week, we've got the beginning of Jack Brisco week, as Jack Brisco actually beats Al Madrill for the NWA heavyweight title. And we've got Jose and Joe this time against Kim Duck and John Tolos, and they win that match.
Louis Tilley is the booker in LA at this time, and he's going to bring Tony Rocco in. So his after he gets finished with this week, I think he's gone to Los Angeles and has a run there just as himself. No mask, no Baron, no anything like that. So.
Gotcha. And then I did note on the 24th, Mad Dog defends against Joe Ledoux in a no disqualification match, which I guess goes, they probably was part of the brass knuckles stipulations anyway. But again, Joe Ledoux's about to leave, and so Mad Dog goes over him in this Battle of the Bullies.
We go to San Antonio on Wednesdays here in June, and I'm trying to find out more about this, but it seems like the Funks they're in San Antonio quite a bit here in the summer of '75.
You're reading my mind, Tony. They're not anywhere else, in this part of Texas, but they are in San Antonio regularly and have some big feuds.
They're in San Antonio and they're in Corpus just a little bit. So I wonder what they're working out with Fritz. I don't know. I've got to.
Well, is it Fritz or is it the local promoter? Maybe are they getting a little piece to come in? Do they maybe they have a hole in their schedule on a Wednesday or a Thursday night that's not being filled in their territory or with their bookings?
Well,
there's a lot going on in San Antonio.
What I'm seeing that you aren't seeing is that there are some Dallas guys in Amarillo.
Interesting.
So there's some talent trading going on. Yeah,
okay.
Talent trading going on. And also keep in mind here another little piece that we'll get to next time we do a show, but Fritz is campaigning to become president of the National Wrestling Alliance. And so there's been quite a bit of activity here in San Antonio this whole year of '75. Terry and Dory lost the international tag team titles back in February to Jumbo Saruta and Giant Baba. That was televised and taped and shown in Japan. So there's a lot of stuff going on here with San Antonio. And in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking, where's Joe Blanchard in all of this, right? Because we know he ends up with the town, and he is the local promoter for San Antonio at this time. But he's the one name that's missing from all of this, right? So we got the NWA title being defended on a regular basis. We got the Funks here on the regular basis, and we've got Fritz here in a couple of places in '75. So it's just an interesting thing.
Tony, I was thinking about this as I do some research for another project. We were talking about this offline a little bit. San Antonio is a sneaky town for its importance in the history of wrestling. You don't think about it first and foremost necessarily, but it's San Antonio where the wrestlers go on strike in protest of the TV cameras hurting their pay. That's in 1952, December 10th. It's San Antonio has a follow-up to the Texas Wrestling War where Morris Siegel and Norman Clark go to war with the established promoter in San Antonio in 1958. San Antonio obviously has a big effect in, Joe Blanchard breaking off from Fritz and then Joe Blanchard partnering with Paul Bosch in Houston, that falling through, the USA Network, that falling through. There's a lot that goes on in San Antonio that's important to the history of wrestling.
And this has nothing to do there. I'm sure this has no link to anything we're talking about, but I'm just chuckling because if you've looked at very many programs for Houston wrestling, which Greg and I both have a nice collection. Greg has more than I do and collecting more all the time. I just have a couple of select ones, but Pearl Beer is a big advertiser in the Houston programs, and Pearl Beer is made in San Antonio. So I don't know.
That is interesting.
I don't know if that plays into anything. I just think that's interesting. And if you've
apropos of nothing, as they say.
And if you've ever been to San Antonio, you've seen the huge Pearl Beer can that is in San Antonio. So that's kind of cool too.
It's one of the landmarks, especially if you're a fraternity guy, right?
It is. Yep.
So Wednesday the 11th in San Antonio, as you alluded to, Jack Brisco beats Dory Funk, and Jose Lothario beats Terry Funk And then in the third match, John Tolos beats Red Bastine. So what a trio of big events.
I don't know too, and I may if I keep bringing this up every time, I'll just apologize in advance. But as we get closer to the end of 75, we're going to have Terry's title run,
Yeah.
and
You said that last time, and it's definitely something to keep in mind.
yeah, and if I mention this over and over, I apologize. I've slept since then, but I don't know. But I just wonder if Dory and Terry aren't talking, because I know Dory is going to lobby for Terry to win the title at the August convention, which he does get the approval and the sign off. And typically, the challenger for the title, whoever gets approved, goes around to all the territories and gets beat, because then that makes them a beatable champion when they come back around with the title. So I just wonder, I mean, Terry's doing a lot of jobs here, so it just makes me wonder if he isn't already thinking in advance that, oh, well, I mean, Terry never was a person who worried about losing his heat if he lost a match.
Yeah.
So I wonder if he's just thinking, okay, I'm going to go do this. I'll be able to get my mojo back later on if it doesn't work out. But just in case I get the nod, I will have done all this work for that, if that makes sense to you guys.
Yeah, totally. Now, you think that was a great show, right? You have the NWA champion in town. How do you follow that? Well, listen to the show on the 18th, Tony. Al Madrill against John Tolos for the Texas title. That goes to a DQ. Mad Dog against Joe Ledoux for the Brass Knuckles title. Mad Dog wins that. And then Superstar Graham and Jose Lothario in an arm wrestling contest that goes to a no contest. And, not only did that bring the people back in on the 18th, but actually you can look at that booking and you can pretty much figure out what they do on the 25th as well.
All right, sounds good. Let's see. Corpus Christi's Thursday night. So we got a humongous show on June the 12th.
Right. Speaking of Terry Funk, the
Yeah.
main event is Jose Lothario and Terry Funk in a Russian chain match. Now, I would love to know the backstory here, wouldn't you?
I would. Although,
Did Terry run from a previous match? Why did they need to be tied together by a Russian chain?
No, but I can tell you this. Red Bastine and Terry Funk did a famous Russian chain match, I think in Fort Worth earlier this year. And I also did one in Amarillo. So I don't know if this has just kind of become Terry's gimmick match for Texas in 1975, but this is like the third or fourth Russian chain match he's done in the state of Texas. So I wish we had the TV for this, so we'd be able to
program just something to set it up.
Yeah, something that help us understand that a little bit better. But I do know that he does a bunch of these Russian chain matches with different opponents.
That match was so good or so important that it went above on your list the Jack Brisco Dory Funk Jr. match for the NWA title.
Yeah, it main evented the night. I know that Red Bastine Russian chain match was on television. We just don't have the tape of it, but it was broadcast. Great match.
So those are the two main events. John Tolos beats Red Bastine again. Joe Ledoux and Al Madrill beat Grand Marcus and Mad Dog Vashan, and in the opener, Bill Howard beat Kim Duck. So what a show for a mid-month Thursday night in Corpus Christi.
And Tolos is this is not for the Texas title, but he's the Texas heavyweight champion here. And Red Bastine had an amazing Texas heavyweight championship run. So beating Red really elevates John Tolos. That's not a small victory there. That's a big time match that puts him on a little bit higher level as the Texas champion.
Yeah, it's again, I mean, Red may be leaving, maybe he's thinking about business. But, maybe he's just thinking business in general. He can control himself. He knows what he wants in the ring. He knows who he's trying to elevate. And he's doing a really good job of making some of the heels look like main event heels. I mean, John Tolos, Superstar Graham, Mad Dog Vashan. It's the opposite of sort of the Dusty Rhodes booking, right?
Well, in this era, typically a booker that also worked in the territory and worked on screen, which that was very common. but the typical method of operation was you go in, you get yourself over, you work really hard to build yourself up in the first half of your tenure. And then in the second half of your tenure, you cash all that in, right?
Yeah.
You start taking advantage of everything that you've built up and start putting it on the people before you end your tenure. Now, Dusty's run is a little bit different because from 85 on, and you and I were talking about this offline, but the wrestling business changed on the fives every decade.
Sure.
55, 65, 75, 85. Well, in 85, the wrestling business metamorphosized in a way that it never had been before. And so booking from 85 to 90 was different, and guys were trying to figure it out. It was the regular method was changing. And so I give some of that to Dusty on some of his decisions. Well, some of his decisions were cockamamie, but he did have a pretty good run there, and he did make some changes that would not have been made in a regular run.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just throwing that out there. You could substitute Dick Slater or any of those guys. I just was really impressed with Red's June and July. And as you said, he had built himself up to do that, so that now it means something that he's putting over other people.
You bet. You bet. All right. So that's Monday through Thursday. That's the biggest show in Corpus Christi in June. So now we get to the big Friday night shows in Houston.
Yeah, so we have coming up Houston. This is still Jack Brisco week, Friday the 13th. Jack is going to defend against Mad Dog Vashan. And for some reason, this just caught my eye. I sent you the program from June 6th, which, as we've talked about, people that don't know, usually the Houston wrestling programs, the cover was not for that week's events. It was an ad, basically, for the next week's events. Houston, like all these towns, was a weekly town. They wanted to lure you in for the next week as well. So usually they'd already set up the main event, and they would advertise it on the cover of the week before's wrestling program. So I'm going to read just a little bit of the cover to you. The headline is, "Can Champion Cope with Dog?" asks Bosch. Promoter Paul Bosch is one of the many promoters across the nation who thinks Jack Brisco has made an error in agreeing to defend his belt against Mad Dog Vashan next Friday. "I wonder how any champion can cope with the style of Mad Dog," says Bosch. "He is deadly serious when he says he will do anything to win the title, and that he never lets anyone down when he has promised something. Brisco will need a suit of armor to take the pounding that will be coming his way from Mad Dog. No matter what kind of background, no matter how much confidence, no matter how much experience he has had, no champion could ever sign to meet a human windmill like Mad Dog Vashan without a strange feeling that he could lose his belt. Yet, with the NWA leaning on him, Jack Brisco agreed to face the wild man of the mat here next Friday. The experts immediately challenged Brisco's judgment, and from coast to coast, calls came in to promoter Paul Bosch's office, with men who know wrestling well expressing disbelief that Brisco had actually agreed for the match. To a man, they felt that Brisco had made a mistake and would not be able to cope with Mad Dog's nonstop belligerent and battering tactics. They think Brisco will be an ex-champion for sure. Fans expressed their feelings about Mad Dog based on his wild style and on the deadly earnest and sincere attitude he takes to the game, as feelings of confidence that he will win the belt. Mad Dog never whimpers or cries or asks for favors, said one fan in a manner that has been backed by others. He gets in there and goes after his man with everything he's got. I feel sorry for Brisco. He's whipped. Mad Dog's style makes it a matter of survival for Brisco, who will have to try to counter the human windmill with speed and skill. He cannot meet Mad Dog on his own terms, and if he tries, the experts feel he will be annihilated. Champions historically avoid men like Mad Dog, and for good reason. But next Friday, Jack Brisco walks where they fear to tread.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
That's very cool. And for those of you who may not be familiar, I want to do a little bit here on, because I'm just thinking this was a better match than you may be thinking, because Mad Dog Vashan was quite the amateur wrestler. And of course, Jack Brisco was the 1965 NCAA national champion. And so I just want to throw in a couple things about Mad Dog here. Says Mad Dog started his career as an amateur wrestler participating in the 1948 Summer Olympics and winning a gold medal at the 1950 British Empire Games. He made a switch to professional wrestling and spent time in various promotions in the U.S. while occasionally teaming with his brother Paul Vashan. So this dude was in the Summer Olympics in 1948 and was in the 1950 British Games and could go. I mean, he was known primarily as a brawler. The program described him as a human windmill. I mean, that tells you, kind of his crazy style of brawling. But getting in there with Jack, those two probably had a really good wrestling match too.
Well, and I don't know if they talk about it in Houston at this point in time, but he won the AWA title like 5 times. I mean, he traded it on and off with Vern for half a decade. And then, ends up in the tag team division, winning the tag team titles with Paul. So he was, by this stage, he's been a star for more than a decade. And obviously, he's been in Texas for a couple of months, just blowing through everybody. So it's a great, great matchup. And, on one hand, he's sort of the heel in Texas, but it seems like in some of these matches, he's so bad that fans want to cheer for him. And in this kind of match, if you think you're going to see a title change, I bet the fans were pulling for Mad Dog at some point in these matches.
Well, by the time you saw him in the AWA in the 80s on ESPN, he was a lot older and he was more of a brawler. But here in the mid 70s, and like you said, coming off that great run with Vern, where those two had fantastic matches, I just think has to be a really, really strong match in Houston.
And I bet you're right. I bet, 2 out of 3 falls. They split the first 2 falls. Brisco wins the third fall by DQ. And, as we'll talk about in July, it leads to a rematch under the brass knuckles rules, so with no DQs. But I bet you there was a lot more wrestling in the beginning than we would think. If we could ever find these matches, I bet you there's a lot of in the first couple of falls, before it turns into fisticuffs. I bet you there's something there. And what will happen is that in these kind of matches, Mad Dog shows that he can wrestle, and then at the end, the champion shows that he can fight, is typically how they go.
Right. And think about the context here of, if you're not familiar, Texas wrestling was a very snug style. I mean, it was a rough and tough. Guys throwing potatoes was a regular occurrence. I mean, Gary Hart described it as snug, but it was, their working punches were brutal at times in Texas. And so the fans were very accustomed to this kind of, match. And it's really turning, with the brass knucks rules, it's really playing to the Texas style, especially in Houston.
Well, yeah, if you think about it, again, right at this point in time in Texas, we've got Mad Dog and Joe Ledoux in a battle of bullies. We've got John Tolos. We've got Superstar Graham and Steve Strong. We've got a lot of big, thick, hard-hitting bad guys on the card. And like you said, that is the history of Texas wrestling. I mean, the Brass Knuckles title, as you know, started for Bull Curry and Danny McShane to have a Tough Guys title to feud over. And essentially, it's what we would now think of as a WWE style or WWF style Texas death match. It's not multiple falls, until one man can't continue. That's the Texas version of the Texas death match. This is basically no rules. All weapons, closed fists, anything you want to do, you're allowed to do in a brass knuckles match is essentially the way that it goes. There will be no disqualifications for it. So, over the course of these 2 months, as Mad Dog is otherwise blowing through competition, you see the evolution here where he and Brisco go to a DQ in the third fall, and 6 weeks later, they're going to come back with brass knuckles rules. When Jack makes another run through the state, next time Mad Dog gets him by his rules. And so, if you couldn't wait to see this match in June, think about how you're going to feel in July.
Right, exactly. Okay, what else in Houston in June? Anything?
Well, again, we got the great sort of tag team matches, Superstar and Strong, this time against Jose and Al Madril. Seems like in the southern cities, it's more Jose and Al. And in the northern cities, it could be Red, it could be, some other matchups. And then on the 20th, we come back with Superstar and Joe Ledoux. We come back with Tolos and Gran Marcos. And Al Madril goes to a time limit draw with Terry Funk, which again makes me think that you're onto something. Now you have in Houston, Texas, Al Madril going to a time limit draw with Terry. I suspect that, the Funks got in the ear of somebody and said, hey, this is what we need to do to set up the rest of the year.
Every time I study this stuff, I just can't help it. I even posted today, it was promoter Paul Jones's birthday from Atlanta. And I even posted today, I wish I could sit down and talk to that guy for a day or two, just about what he saw during his whole career. This happens to me all the time. I'm sitting here thinking, this stuff happened every freaking Friday night in Houston. What would it have been like to live in Houston, Texas, and be able to go to these shows every single Friday night and see what we just talked about for one single month? It's
Right.
just amazing. I mean, you don't get the quality of, and I'm not dogging the current product at all, but I mean, this is like for PLE main events here that you get every Friday night,
Yeah.
Just
And then the
amazing.
27th, we go to the Astro Arena where Jose and Al have a rematch with Graham and Strong. So maybe now we should talk a little bit about Houston venues.
Yeah, sure. Well, we call it personalities, territories, towns, and buildings for that very reason, because I'm interested in the places where they had wrestling, and Houston is so associated with the Sam Houston Coliseum. There were times they went to, and help me with the pronunciation of the pavilion they went to, the Hoffins. Is that how you say that?
Hofheinz, I
Hoffheinz.
believe.
Hoffheinz
Yeah.
Pavilion. They went there from time to time, and that was located in the Coliseum building, wasn't it?
No.
No?
That was the University of Houston
Okay.
campus. It's now named after the Houston Rockets owner, so it's like the Tilleray Center or something. Um, I forget how you pronounce the Houston Rockets owner's name, but yeah. So originally, Houston Wrestling is in the City Auditorium, which sat about 4,000 people. Um, but then it is torn down in the 1960s, and they moved to the Sam Houston Coliseum. I've been trying to figure out exactly the attendance there, and it varies so much over the years that it's hard to give you just one number. If it was a basketball game, they listed as 9,200. But for wrestling, with the floor opened up, you could get above 10,000. And then, as we've talked about on my show, in 1982, when they reconfigure the Sam Houston Coliseum and they start to run it not weekly, they bump it up and rejigger it a little bit, and they get as high as 11,214. And then for the last Stampede, apparently the fire marshal wasn't there, and they got close to 12,000. So that's a big step up from the 4,000 seat City Odd. But the problem is the Sam Houston Coliseum is not always available on a Friday night. As we talked about last month, in May, they had a lot of high school graduations on Friday night. Basically, the agreement, almost for the length of their run at the Sam Houston Coliseum, is that the city will rent to Houston Wrestling every single Friday that's available. Houston Wrestling will gobble up. But if it's not available, then they'll go someplace else. And they, while the Odd is still there, they go back to the Odd. But then the Odd is torn down. So they go to a place called the Fondee Rec Center. But the problem with that, it was just 1,800 seats. So it was basically like a TV taping. They would do it for continuity and continue to run. Their belief was you had to run every Friday night, because if you didn't, people would lose interest and start doing something else, and they'd get out of the habit.
Right.
So, the Fondee isn't a great place for wrestling. They end up at the University of Houston. But that doesn't, for some reason, that was a part of town that people didn't want to go to. It was, the City Odd and the Rec Center and the Sam Houston Coliseum are all kind of in what you would think of as downtown Houston. They're right off the freeway. They're right next to the Buffalo Bayou, really in the heart of the city. The University of Houston campus is a mile or so, maybe 2 miles south of that, just in a different part of town. It was different buses, different schedules. People weren't sure about the parking. People weren't sure about going on campus. So it didn't work out. And they're really, in 1975, they go to the Astro Arena and they have really high hopes. The University of Houston Pavilion, it seats about 7,200, so it's not a big step down from the Sam Houston Coliseum. And they try and they try and they try to make this work, and it just doesn't work. It's a huge complex, as you can imagine, the Astrodome, and then there's two other buildings. There's the Astro Hall, which is a convention hall, and the Astro Arena, which is like a small, arena. Well, if somehow you ended up parked on the other side of the Astrodome, you would have like a mile walk to go the circumference of the facility to get to the Astro Arena. And so sometimes, famously, people would say that they would get parked far away and just decide to go home. If there was more than one event that weekend at the Astro Arena, at the complete complex, it made it really hard to park right next to the Astro Arena. So in 1977, I have a program where they're so specific about there are no other events in the complex this weekend. Only wrestling will be here this weekend. And then I'm looking at it right now. I'm picking it up. It says, an Astro Arena suggestion. You can use Westridge or Merworth entrance gates on Kirby Drive, but the Naomi Gate on Fannin is the best way to enter the Astro Arena. So, they're very good at this in the Houston wrestling programs. The last page, if they ever have to go someplace different than the Coliseum, tells you exactly how to get there. Here's the bus routes. Here's where you park. Instead of going to the Coliseum, turn on this road to get to that road. With the Astro Arena, it gets so complex because they're trying so hard to make this work. And by 1979, Tony, they're just skipping weeks. There will be no more wrestling until June 14th.
Right.
We won't be here next Friday night. No wrestling next Friday night. 2 weeks from now, we're going to have an NWA title match. Or 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a blood feud. Or 2 weeks from now, the big battle royal. But they basically go to end of the year rules where every time they have to skip a week, they hype up, 2-3 weeks in advance the next show coming up. And as you know, they've tried Saturdays as an alternative. They try Sundays as an alternative. One history question I have is what happens with the Summit? As far as we know, the last Stampede is the biggest crowd in Houston wrestling history until the WrestleMania era. So, the Summit could seat 17,000. And if you put people on the floor, you might get up to 18,000 or a little above. I've never seen an attendance figure that high, though, for the Summit shows. So much like the Astro Arena, much like University of Houston, I wonder if it's ultimately deemed unsuccessful to run the Summit shows. They just end up, with the Sam Houston Coliseum.
And isn't the Summit where Joe Blanchard tried to run in opposition?
In 1983, once he loses the partnership, it's actually... I wonder if they pull a fast one on Joe Blanchard, because even though Bill Watts comes in August of 1982, the rest of the year they continue to book sort of half and half. They book the top Southwest feuds and the top Mid-South feuds. And at the beginning of 1983, they cut all of that out, and suddenly it's just Paul Bosch and Bill Watts. And the show that you're talking about, the 1983 show, is May of 1983. That's the world heavyweight title tournament that, to an empty Summit where Adrian Adonis wins the belt against Bob Orton. And, those matches are available. They're just not very good.
Orton Jr., right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Orton Jr. And I found on one of my Houston programs, I found this neat drawing on the back page of the Astro Arena. I'll get this to producer Jake so he can put it up for our video watchers. But they've got this drawing of the Astrodome, and it's the 3 building configuration of the Astrodome, the Astro Arena, and Astro Hall. And it says 1,200 ringside seats with no steps to climb, and 6,000 permanent seats very few steps to climb. Yes, beer is available and other beverages and food, and it's air conditioned, of course, in all capital letters.
Of course.
Plenty of restroom facilities. And then there's a three or four, as you mentioned, three or four paragraphs about parking. Um, Another just note about the Astro Arena, it was built in 74, so it's a new building. I mean, it's an
Yeah.
exciting proposition for them to be able to go to Astro Arena because it's brand spanking sparkling new in 75. It's only 8 months old at that point. It's now called Energy, let's see, what's it called now? Reliant Arena, I think. Well, it was called a Reliant Arena. Now it's called Energy Arena. I guess the Energy oil
Well, the
company.
Astrodome complex though is it was vacant for years and years and years, and I think they finally have done something with it, but I could be wrong.
The NRG, the letters are NRG. They are an
Oh, okay.
energy and oil and wind
Yeah, I'm looking
company.
at it now. So they basically built the new stadium right next to the old Astrodome complex.
Yeah, yeah, and they tore down the Astro Hall building and demolished it. But it's very disappointing because I mean, this would have been very cool if this would have worked out for them to be able to go there when the Sam Houston Coliseum wasn't available, but it didn't happen.
No, so here's the thing. Again, remember what I said about the Sam Houston Coliseum and the City Odd and the Fondue? They're all in downtown Houston. It is almost 9 miles from downtown Houston to the Astrodome complex. So I just Googled it. It says 17 minutes.
Yeah, not in
So
Houston.
everybody that knows traffic and in particular people that know Houston traffic, it's can you imagine if you were trying to get, if you're used to taking the bus, for instance, to the Sam Houston Coliseum, and now you had to figure out how to get to the Astrodome. I mean, it is in a very different part of town. And I don't mean that in the same way as like the University of Houston, which is just a couple of miles away. I mean, it's in a different, suburb essentially, or it's in a suburb essentially. So, when we've talked about New Orleans and how different it is if you run St. Bernard Parish versus Treme, white part of town versus black part of town versus the lakefront, which is a suburb, on a university campus, 5 miles away out of downtown. This is twice that. This is, 9 miles away from where people are used to going to wrestling. And as soon as it gets more difficult than that, I think you're just, you've got a bad proposition. And as you said, they do everything they can. They try for years to make it work. But by like 78, 79, they've just decided to go without.
Yeah, there's a thing in this program. As many fans who regularly travel to the Astrodome know, there are buses that serve the area. You can catch the bus on Main Street going south. Buses run every 25 minutes until 11:40 p.m. On the way back, the last bus leaves the Astrodome at 11:45 going north. You can take South Main bus number 8400 or 8600. So I mean, they're
Yeah, they're
really
trying.
specific about
They're really trying.
and even off of the two streets, if you're getting off of Kirby, do this, and if you're getting off Fannin, do this, and
Yeah.
if there is a baseball game or any other event, there is still plenty of parking. Baseball games begin at 7:30. We start at 8:30. There's no conflict with baseball traffic. The cost is the same as parking downtown near the Coliseum. So, and
Well,
I
the
mean,
things you try to tell yourself.
well, they didn't get an F for trying, that's for sure.
No. Well, and the funny thing I was thinking about as you were speaking, it's not like they couldn't get 50, 60,000 fans to go see the Astros or the Oilers
Yeah,
or the Blue Bonnet Bowl. So people knew where the Astrodome was. It's just wrestling fans are creatures of habit.
they are.
And they were used to going downtown. It was an effort to get them to go someplace else. And when it became difficult, that's when it became disappointing.
I'll just go next week. That's what they
Yeah,
would probably say is, I'll just
exactly.
I'll just go next week. I'll skip
Well, and the
this.
thing is, obviously, because that's what they do. They always hype up a week in advance. So you knew ahead of time, oh, I'll skip this one and catch the next one.
All right, so that wraps up June. Let's go to July, and let's go back to the beginning of the loop on Monday nights in Fort Worth. What do we got in July?
Yeah, so in Fort Worth, we start on the 7th with the Superstar and Jose arm wrestling contest, which actually obviously leads to bigger things in their feud. On the 14th, Superstar wins a battle royal, and we've got Al Madril beating Mad Dog by DQ. And we've got John Tolos and El Gran Marcus. So I wonder if Marcus is actually going to be leaving us soon because he's starting to fade a little bit. He didn't maybe get the pop they were expecting on his face turn, or, I don't know. Maybe he just decides he's better off someplace else. Actually, on the 21st, he loses a match to Superstar. And in another Jack Brisco week, we have Brisco and Al Madril, and Madril is actually DQ'd in this match against Brisco. And then on the 21st, we also have a Jose and Mad Dog time limit draw, which leads the next week to a lumberjack match. Actually, I wonder if Joe Ledoux gets involved because the next week we have Mad Dog and Joe Ledoux in a lumberjack match. That is one of the last Joe Ledoux matches in Texas.
Yeah, and that's his gimmick match. So
his gimmick match, but he's going to lose it to the Mad Dog.
Yeah, that's usually his blow-off match, and since Mad Dog's staying and he's not, he doesn't win this particular one. So
yeah.
Hey, let me ask you this question: what's your thoughts about superstar Billy Graham here? Because man, he gets over in Texas like $1 million, and he's over in the AWA at this time. He's tag team partners with Dusty, taking on the Russians or the Germans, and but he goes into St. Louis before he gets the WWF title. They try him out in St. Louis with Harley in a match, and it just doesn't go anywhere. Like, what do you think about the superstar here? I mean, he's over, right, in Texas?
I was listening, it was one of the Briscoe and Bradshaw shows that you did that were so wonderful. And you guys were talking about St. Louis and how different St. Louis is and how Dusty didn't work in St. Louis. Well, if Dusty's not going to work in St. Louis, Superstar is probably not going to work in St. Louis, right? I mean, under certain circumstances, maybe, but he's too much of a gimmick for St. Louis, whereas he's almost like the perfect gimmick in Texas. They like everything bigger in Texas, right? So,
yeah.
And then the other thing is
superstar Billy Graham would be, if you looked at him, he would be everything about an NWA champion Sam Muchnick would not agree to. Everything about him.
Yeah. The other thing I think people need to keep in mind, and this came out in the Dark Side of the Ring episode, 1970s Superstar Graham is completely different than 1980s Superstar Graham.
Much better.
Better. When you talk about why did they pick Superstar Graham to beat Bruno, to become the WWF champion, it's because of what he's doing in the AWA and in Texas in 74, 75, 76. This is his era.
Yeah.
And he is a huge star from the moment he arrives in Texas. The feud with Ken Patera, the feud with Andre the Giant in 1974. I always talk about how Houston takes a bad guy and makes him unbeatable for a season or two. They did that with Superstar in 74, and we're still coasting on that era. He's still having these feuds. Superstar and Jose Lothario is just starting, and he's been here for a year having these kind of feuds with people. He was a big star in Texas.
Really was.
And I love the program that I sent you for the 4th of July, where Superstar Billy Graham is wearing the Mickey Mouse shirt, the wife beater. I know that's not the term anymore, but the cutoff shirt, the muscle shirt, and he's gigantic, and he is obviously not kung fu Superstar Billy Graham. He's flamboyant Superstar Billy Graham, and
his matches were not boring either. They were fast paced. I mean, he bumped a lot, and it wasn't that he was that great a wrestler, but his matches were exciting.
Yeah, I think of some of the Junkyard Dog revival that we're going through now, where somebody posted it just the other day. I think it was Elliot, where he posts a Butch Reed Junkyard Dog clip, and it's brilliant. It's wonderful. And Dog's great. And
Mhm.
Dog's moving. And this is heavy Dog. This
Right.
is 1983 Dog, right? But he's running around and he's laying it in on Reed and he gives him an elbow to the face. And I mean, it's stiff. And there's nothing, that foreshadows WWF Junkyard Dog. There's no pulled moves. It doesn't look phony. It looks really good. And I bet you if we found a 1974 Superstar Billy Graham clip, it would be a much different Billy Graham than, 1984 against the Barbarian or whatever.
Oh,
And that
yeah. If
famous
you,
Dave Meltzer hates Superstar Billy Graham, clip.
yeah, I mean, if you just watch his 77 matches in the WWF, his title defenses. I was talking to Steve Gennarelli about this, going to be on or we were talking about it on the show that just previously on here a few weeks ago. His matches with Spiros Arion and some of those matches were just fantastic.
Yeah. And remember that this is the 70s, it's a different era. This is not, we've seen Gorgeous George come and go, but we haven't seen somebody this muscular and this flamboyant in a package, and he's backing it up in the ring. He's a tough guy in the ring, in this tough territory, as you said.
Some of the same things that got Dusty over in this same era are some of the same things that are working for Superstar. And as a tag team in the AWA, they drew money. I mean, fabulous.
There's probably something there as well, right? I mean, the fact that they were working together, both of them sort of coming of age at the same time, and both of them getting a big push at the same time, sort of mirroring one another in some of their mannerisms. And then, as well as taking those sort of things from the same sort of, from the black community, from Thunderbolt Patterson.
Patterson. I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
And Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a different style. It's coming out of this era of, the crew cut cowboy and such as the baby face. And this is a different kind of baby face. Superstar's a heel here, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, sure.
And Superstar and Steve Strong is a pretty good, 1970s tag team. You've got these two great big muscular guys. You can see where that would really pop you get Jose and Al Madril against them, as we have for much of these 2 months.
Well, speaking of elevating John Tolos some more, as we get into Dallas on Tuesday nights, the very first card, boy, did they put the shine on John Tolos here. Tell them what happened.
Well, I have a question. It's listed as a pole battle royal match, and it says that Fritz and Tolos were co-winners. So I'd love to know the rules about this match. And
I'm sure they climbed the pole together and got to the whatever was at the top of the pole. I'm sure it was one of those tie deals where they both got to the wherever the prize was at simultaneously.
What I'm imagining is you have to go climb the pole and get the prize to win the match, but you can be eliminated by being thrown over the top rope, right?
Yeah,
Something like that.
So
maybe
maybe Fritz put somebody out the same time Tolos was climbing the pole or something. Is that what you mean? Or
well, no, I mean, maybe you start with 10 men or 14 men in the ring, and of course everybody tries to get up the pole, but at first there's too many men in the ring. But then guys start to get eliminated, and all of a sudden you've got just one or two guys left in the ring. Maybe Fritz and Tolos, as you said, go up the pole at the same time, from different directions or whatever. Maybe the pole breaks and they both get it down. I don't know exactly, but I would imagine that they were probably, the only two guys left in the ring or something to that effect at that point in time.
yeah.
But very curious. I'd love to know more about that match.
Now in the old Wrestle Royal, when that would happen, then Fritz and Tolos would have a match, and that would be the main event. But they didn't do that. I think they were just trying to push Tolos up another notch here by having him and Fritz tie. I mean, Fritz wasn't going to put him over, but that's the same as putting him over.
Yeah, yeah. So then we come back with Joe Ledoux and the Mad Dog the next week, the 8th. And Jose and Madril go into a double DQ against Billy Graham and John Tolos. And then on the 15th, we've got a Texas death match with Al Madril and John Tolos. And I believe this is the week that Madril regains the Texas title.
All right.
After that, you know, Madril beats Tolos in a Texas death match, regains the Texas title. On the 22nd, he gets an NWA title shot against Jack Brisco and goes to a 90-minute time limit draw. How about that?
Yeah. I mean, Jack did a handful of these 90-minute matches in '75, and this was one of them in Dallas.
We've
So,
mentioned this before, but and we say this about a lot of different guys. We just kind of said it about Superstar Graham. You know, if you only know like 1986 Al Madril, you're missing what Al Madril was in the 1970s, and he's a huge babyface star at this point.
well, if you watch, video of World Class and you see Al Madril and you're wondering why are people making such a big deal over this guy, it's because of all this brand equity he built way back in '75 and '76.
Yeah, if World Class had only been a Texas territory in 1986, it might have worked. It's just to a broader audience, they didn't understand why Al Madril was the lead heel. But in Texas, it made sense that 10 years after his big babyface run, now he's a big heel fighting the Von Erichs.
You know,
It should have worked or could have worked, but it wouldn't work on a national level when the opposition has Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair.
Well, I think that was a problem with Vern and with Fritz and with some of these guys. When Vern got on ESPN and Fritz got on his distribution, I think they just didn't understand. You're gonna have to explain a lot of the stuff to. They were just so accustomed to being local, right? They were just so accustomed to for the audience to understand and know all of these long-term stories. They just didn't think they had to explain it, but they would have been better off if they would have incorporated. And they didn't do that many video packages back then. And when they did do them, they were music videos. But if they would have done some of those cool packages that we have now to explain some of these stories, they would have been a lot better off.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And then the last week in Dallas, the 29th, we will call that El Santo week. So the week before we have Jack Brisco week, and this week we have El Santo week as he teams with Madril and Jose, and they go over Billy Graham, Mad Dog, and John Tolos.
Okay.
So that's the three biggest heels in the Federation at this point. And as soon as El Santo comes in, I bet you he got the win as well.
Oh, sure. Sure he did. Of course he did. All right.
Yeah. Now he will be in San Antonio that week. He will be in Corpus that week. And it will be in August, but I believe he's in Houston that week as well.
So back Wednesday nights in San Antonio in July, guess who's back in San Antonio?
Yes, he's back. It's the Funks against Jose and El Gran Marcus on the 16th. And then Jose and Terry Funk in a Russian chain match on the 23rd.
Yeah. And
something's cooking here, Tony.
There is. There definitely is. All right. And then on the 30th, another big, huge match here with El Santo and Lothario going over
against Tolos and Graham, which is a good team if you think about it. I mean, I like Steve Strong with Billy Graham. I know that he's a protege and they're friends, but Tolos and Graham is a good team as well. And there's a weird result here, and I can't figure it out. It says Maurice Rose beat Mad Dog Vashan.
Yeah, I don't know about that one either. I saw that.
Well, and when you look like on Cage Match, there's no entry for Maurice Rose.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, who could it be? You know, and it's very funny that the name Maurice, which is Mad Dog Vashan's name, it's a weird result. And who is this guy? Yeah. And there's no you can't Google Maurice Rose. Like Louis Tillet might come up in some form or fashion, or but I don't know. There's just it's one of those Al Getz history mysteries. And why would they put him over Mad Dog in San Antonio? While Mad Dog is A, the Brass Knuckles champion, and B, in the middle of a 4-month run of being pushed up the ladder. I need to know. And I don't know how to know.
It's one of those Easter eggs we have to go look and see if we can find.
I got to get back on my newspaper clipping circuit, I guess.
All right, Thursday night in Corpus.
A lot of good stuff in Corpus this month. On the 3rd, we've got Jose and John Tolos. Jose wins by DQ. Mad Dog beats Joe Ledoux. So again, Joe is on his way out. On the 10th, we've got Superstar and Jose. Jose gets disqualified in the third fall. On the 17th, we've got Jose and Terry Funk in an I Quit match. And guess who says I quit?
Terry.
Terry. So again, now we are, let's see. So August, September, October, we're four months away now from Terry winning the NWA title and 1 month away from them knowing for sure, right?
And we're
Presumably they've been lobbying and they kind of know at this point in late July, as you would say. So yeah, I mean that result smells like they're setting up business for next year.
and we're 24 years. Think about this. We're 24 years away from the I Quit match on the Clash of the Champions on TBS.
Oh my God.
With Terry and Ric Flair.
That's amazing.
Isn't it?
So Joe Ledoux's last week in the territory, I think. He loses to Superstar Graham in Corpus on the 17th. And then we've got El Gran Marcus beating John Tolos by DQ. So there's still, notice in the southern cities, Marcus is getting still a little more of a push than he's getting in the northern cities.
Well, I take
In
that
fact,
back.
next week-
I take that back. We're not 24 years. We're 14 years away. The math in my head didn't work right. Yeah.
I math well.
From
Yeah.
from 75 to 89 to the I Quit match. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's all good. And then the 24th, we have Jose and Marcus beating the Funks by DQ. So again, Funks in a southern Texas city making an appearance. And then the 31st, we've got, again, El Santo week. He's with Jose, and they beat Jeff Ports and the Superstar. And we've got Al Madril beating the Mad Dog in Corpus Christi that week. Now, Jeff Ports is longtime wrestler, English, and the father of Garfield Ports, who's better known as Scott McGee.
Yeah, and he's I think Ports is going to start becoming more prominent here in Texas as
I believe this is his introduction, and yeah, he's going to get he's getting pushed up the cards as we speak. And the fact that he's already getting some main events and main event tag teams means that there's something to him. Scott McGee was a very good worker. I have no reason to doubt that his dad wasn't old school tough and a good worker as well.
So this brings us to the big July 4th show in Houston, and we're back at the Astro Arena again.
Yeah, so we are at the Astro Arena with a Battle Royal, which Al Madril wins. And I've got a little preview of next week's show, which this is the great picture of Superstar Billy Graham that I talked about with the cutoff shirt and the Mickey Mouse face on it. And it says Superstar to face Flying Fists of Jose Lothario. Astro Arena next Saturday night only. So this show is on Friday, July 4th, but the next one will be Saturday, July 12th. And here's what it says, Tony, real quick. Superstar Billy Graham, who swells his muscles and shoots off his mouth with equal speed, spoke when he should have been listening at the Astro Arena last week. And it leads to trouble for him at the Astro Arena next Saturday night. He will face the potent and flying fists of Jose Lothario in one of the pair of main events. Superstar ridiculed Jose's challenge to arm wrestle him and claimed he would break the Mexican star's arm if he tried it. Jose said he would try if Superstar agreed to a match with him right afterward. And that's the way that it stands. The pair will arm wrestle, and the one provision that Jose insisted upon and got was that Steve Strong be kept out of the ring during the arm wrestling. After that, I don't care, because I will clobber him if he sticks his big nose or his big muscles in that ring, said Jose. In my book, these guys are not super anything except super mouths. That statement echoed the feelings of a lot of fans who hope that Jose will quiet the muscle man in 2 fields on the same night. And Jose is confident that he can do it. And in the meantime, the return match will be Al Madril or the second main, Al Madril and John Tolos. So they are, again, they actually took a match at the Astro Arena and then used it to hype up another match at the Astro Arena 2 weeks later. Right. So even if you were going back and forth, even if you went to both places, they did a little program to try to get you from one Astro Arena show to the next one, which is not only in a weird place, the Astro Arena, but this time on a Saturday night.
I wish it would have worked.
I know
they put together a lot of work to. I mean, you're working it that intricately into your booking.
Yeah.
That's pretty smart. I wish it would have worked.
So I'm looking at my results, and maybe it happened in multiple towns, but I think the 12th, Saturday the 12th at the Astro Arena, is where Almadrill wins the Texas title from John Tolos.
Yeah, they only just switched it one time this time.
Oh, okay. All right. And then Superstar and Jose, again, it's a DQ in the third fall. And at that point, guess who they bring back to Houston, Texas
Johnny
for the next week?
Valentine. Johnny Valentine.
Johnny Valentine. And not only that, but Johnny Valentine as a babyface in a feud with John Tolos. How about that for a hard-hitting match?
Johnny is he's the Mid-Atlantic heavyweight champion right now in the Crockett territory. He's their number one heel, and he has been for 18 months or so. But in the month of July, kind of in June and July, he has traveled outside the Crockett territory quite a bit. He went to Florida. He come here to Texas. Well, he comes here to Texas once a month or so, on and off throughout most of the first half of the 70s anyway. But he's traveling a lot here at this particular time. And for those of you who are not familiar with wrestling history, he's going to be involved in this devastating plane crash this fall that ends his career. So this is his last time in Houston, right?
This is his last match in Houston wrestling. Now, obviously, he comes back as a manager, and he's there a little bit, as a good guy manager or as a special attraction, just to show his face and be cheered by the crowd. But this is the last time he's actually in the ring wrestling a match, and he goes over John Tolos, which is not a bad result for him to have. Obviously they didn't know it would be his last match, but that's going to be it.
In May, I was at the St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame ceremony, and Greg Valentine was put into the St. Louis Hall of Fame. And when Herb Simmons gave him his plaque commemorating his induction, he looked up at the ceiling of the building and said, "This is for you, Pop." And it was I was emotional about it anyway, just because, knowing the impact that Johnny Valentine had on professional wrestling, it's particularly in the city of St. Louis, for sure.
It's too bad, one, obviously, that he had the accident and lost the end of his career. But it's too bad there's not more footage of Johnny Valentine in some of his big feuds. I mean, I would love to watch some of that Wahoo McDaniel stuff. As the saying goes, you can still hear them hitting each other. They hit so hard. And, Greg Valentine had a great career. It's sort of funny, though, again, one of these situations where, as good as he was, the father actually was a bigger star. And Greg Valentine was a huge star. It's not a knock on him. It's just a recognition that for more than 2 decades, Johnny Valentine was a main event star all over the country.
Part of it for Greg was the era that he came along. The territories were dying. There wasn't as much of a cooperative effort that took place as had been in the era before, where Johnny was a star. Johnny Valentine, to me, the way I would describe it is, if you like music and you like some jazz, but you haven't heard a whole lot of different kinds of jazz, you have to kind of adjust yourself to listen to a different kind of music. You kind of got to adjust yourself a little bit to a Johnny Valentine match, because he's so psychologically sound and so methodically slow that if you're used to modern wrestling from 1985 forward, it would be hard for you to just all of a sudden watch a Johnny Valentine match. But it would be well worth you adjusting yourself to be patient enough to watch one.
If you think about what wrestling was back in the day before the 5-star matches, and let's script everything ahead of time for the cameras so we know where to perform and when the break is and what spots we need to get in. It was, who is the toughest SOB that you can think of, and how does he do against this other tough SOB? So, again, Johnny Valentine, when you have, for instance, once he becomes liked in Texas. Every time you've got a bully that's now having his season of being the tough guy, one of the guys they could bring back in to face him was Johnny Valentine. And, as we've talked about in 72, Wahoo and Valentine go to Mid-Atlantic and change the face of that promotion. And they leave in their wake Houston wrestling and Texas wrestling, where they've been the biggest stars for a couple of years at least. And, that's when Jose gets pushed up and made a big star. But you can always bring Wahoo or Johnny V back and put them in the main event. And you know how wrestling fans are. You might not hear of Johnny Valentine for a couple of years. So when you hear he's coming back, and not only is he coming back, but he's going to face that evil Crusher or Superstar or Bull or Mad Dog, who nobody else has been able to get a handle on, that'll bring you back into the arena, right?
Yeah, and also I think too, when the business was way more oriented to house shows, I think Johnny was more conducive to that than a television product. Just as you described, I think that's more conducive to a television product and scripted matches, and everything has to be timed and all that. Johnny's whole gimmick was geared toward
worked.
It was geared to a house show, right?
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing. I think in the Anderson Brothers sort of way, or in the WCCW cameras in the ring in the 1980s sort of way, you could still get a Johnny Valentine over just by showing how tough he is. If the camera's right there and he's really laying it in and you can hear it and you can see the wince on the other guy's face, you'd still get that guy over. The Andersons, and this is in the era where everything's changing, even when it was Arn and Ole, I could intellectually understand they're cutting that guy off from his tag team partner. They're working one part of the body. They're going to work it until that guy screams. And even though for the rest of the world, you wouldn't necessarily see somebody submit to an arm bar, you've just watched them destroy this poor guy's arm for 20 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And it makes sense logically in what wrestling was supposed to be.
And
I think Johnny Valentine's exactly the same way. He's just that guy that's going to beat you up till he beats you.
And much the same way that Fritz came back in Texas Stadium, I think Johnny Valentine could have come back in that way. Just, by the time that period rolled around, if he's just coming back for a big stadium show, he could have been huge in Texas for sure. Okay, so what else in Houston here as we wrap up?
And he's still, even when he's on crutches.
Yeah.
So they end again in Houston on that same show with Valentine and Tolos. They have Jose and Al Madril against Superstar and Steve Strong, and they go over 2 falls to 1. And then the 25th, we get that Brisco and Mad Dog resolution in the Brass Knuckles rules. Probably everybody coming in thought Mad Dog was going to get the better of the champ and win the title, but lo and behold, the scientific amateur star rises to the occasion and wins 2 falls to 1 against the tough guy Mad Dog. And then at the same time, we've got Superstar and Joe Ledoux. I guess this is his actual last match. And Superstar wins in 2 straight falls.
Yeah, 2 straight.
So how about that?
Yep, 2 straight over the Canadian Lumberjack. So he's headed for, I don't know if they're greener pastures, they're just other pastures, that's for sure. And, one thing I want to get across.
I think he goes to the AWA in Florida for the rest of the year.
It might be. One thing.
He's got some good stuff going.
I want to get across to you, listeners and viewers, is and the way I like to do these shows, the way we've got them formatted and the way we're talking about them, is to get over just how brilliant the booking is here for these 2 months. I mean, this is really, really immaculately put together. Just wonderfully, I feel like. And I would have loved to be a fan in any of these towns, the way that Fort Worth and Dallas and San Antonio, particularly San Antonio, is interesting to me at this particular time, we talked about, and Corpus and Houston, just to be able to go to these shows every single week would just have been fabulous. Well, you got any other closing thoughts?
And by and large, each of these markets has their own TV. Well, I was just going to say that they all have their own TV. They're all running these feuds on their own timetable, probably, presumably, some localized interviews. But yeah, you can see the booking throughout this month. And I did note we've got a couple other people on the cards that we haven't mentioned. Tiger Conway Sr. makes a couple of appearances. Tully Blanchard's in a couple of matches down south. Spot shows Klein and Fairfield during the month, and both of those are essentially on the triangle, either between San Antonio and Dallas or Houston and Dallas. So everything in accord to this territory, and what a great couple of months in Texas wrestling for sure. As you say, 1975 is one of those years that changes everything. Some for the bad, but a lot of stuff good and stuff going on in Texas this month and in Houston in particular. That big show in Corpus in June, big show in Dallas at the beginning of the month where Fritz comes back, and a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I think it was on our last program. Tully that was his debut. I think in our last, I can't remember if it was April or May, but he made his debut, and he's gonna appear more and more as time goes on. His dad's the local promoter in San Antonio. I love Tiger Conway coming back here for some appearances. I hope he sticks around for a while because I'd really like to talk more about him. I mean, he's a Texas wrestling legend. He made his home there in Houston, and it was kind of a big deal for him to come back and make appearances. His son, Junior.
Yeah, well, Tiger Conway Jr. will show up at some point in the years.
Yeah, I was just going to say Junior's working for Eddie Graham at this point down in Florida right now during the month of June. As a matter of fact, his son, Junior, is in a program with J.J. Dillon over the Florida television title. And later, as the year gets close to the end, we're going to see J.J. Dillon show up here in Texas as a manager in his first managerial run. So it's kind of cool connection. All right, Greg, anything other thoughts here?
Good stuff coming up. And we will get Tiger Jr. and Senior. No, like I said, just a great time in Texas wrestling history, a great time in Houston wrestling history. As we said, big show in Corpus, a lot of great Jack Brisco weeks at the end. And, it's October 4th that Johnny Valentine is in that plane crash, as we know, one of the famous plane crashes in 1975. So we've just seen our last wrestling match with Johnny Valentine in Houston, Texas.
All right, everybody. Well, listen, thanks for joining us. Catch Greg Klein's Old School Wrestling Talk wherever you get your podcasts, and Greg will be back on a future show coming up as we will cover August and September down the road here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast on our personalities, territories, towns, and buildings episodes, and we will see you back here in Texas next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed our show today talking about East Texas in the summer of 75. So many great matches, so many great angles and programs in all those fantastic Texas towns where they were drawing some big money in 1975. If you like what we do here at the Time Tunnel and you like my work, you might want to think about visiting my Substack channel. It's Tony Richards 4, Substack.com. And you can subscribe to my daily wrestling history newsletter called The Daily Chronicle. Comes out every single morning. I have birthdays of wrestlers, past and present. I have a RIP salute every day for those in the business who we want to respect and honor that have passed on. And we usually talk about, I write about an event on that day in pro wrestling history or a subsequent event that happened around that time frame. Also, I give regular updates on my book that I'm working on about the life and times of Dory Funk Sr. That's all in the Daily Chronicle. I also have paid subscriptions that are available if you want to support my work by investing a little bit of money, $5 a month, or you can save $10 a year with a $50 annual subscription. and you'll get some exclusive content that I write. I usually write every single month about the wrestling history books that I read the previous month. I write a series called The Evolution of Pro Wrestling. And right now you can get a special article that I wrote about the West Texas masked mystery, a West Texas masked mystery of 1935. It's a match about Cyclone Mackey and the Masked Marvel. Now, what's interesting about it is that Cyclone Mackey was the original Masked Marvel down in Mexico. He went down there and was put in that gimmick by Salvador Luderoth in 1934. But when he came back to West Texas, he had a name as Cyclone Mackey. And the booker, Doc Sarpolis, wanted to create a program for that summer, so he put another fella under the hood as the Masked Marvel, and they drew big money. As a matter of fact, they broke the outdoor attendance record in Lubbock, Texas that year in that summer. So that's all in that article, The West Texas Masked Mystery of 1935, and you get that if you're a paid subscriber. And I've got some other exclusive content coming up as well. You can join our Facebook group, the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. It's a private group. You can find it if you search for it. You search for Tony Richards or Facebook, Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. Be sure and answer the questions we ask for membership and agree to the group rules, because I have an obligation to protect my members of my group, and I take that very seriously. Scammers can't answer those questions, and we don't want any spam and scammers and people getting their profiles ripped off. And so we want to keep all that out of the group. So we want you to answer those questions. If you're on X, you can follow me at Tony Richards 4. I do a lot of posting and a lot of interacting with people there. We have a lot of great conversations about classic pro wrestling history. So come on over to Substack, Tony Richards 4 at Substack.com. Support my work. Subscribe to my newsletter. Consider investing in a paid subscription. All right, next week here on the show, we'll have more classic pro wrestling history as Kurt Nielsen will be here to talk about his book. And I'll also have another great guest here on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. Hey, everybody, I'll see you then.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. Tune in for another great episode next week, interviewing wrestlers, referees, and media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. We'll release a new episode soon. Don't you dare miss it.